Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today we're going to attack the eligibility chaos. We're going to go into it. You know, there was an On3 article this afternoon about just the SEC meetings in Birmingham. I'm going to do that. Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today we're going to go after all this eligibility stuff. Right, there was an article this afternoon by On3 just citing what some SEC presidents and ADs have already had to say about, former pros coming back to the college ranks, mainly LSU and Lane Kiffin getting those guys. And there is a meeting in Birmingham this week among those presidents, among those ADs, and that will be the focal point of the discussion. So before we try and break all that down, if you have been enjoying all this college football content, you want some more SEC stuff right in your laps all season long, subscribe to me here. Follow me on Twitter, Will Thomas CFB. Go check out a peek inside SEC football. I'm doing a live show every Monday morning with Ali Peek and TJ Pittenger over there. We got tons of content on both those channels for you, all about the SEC. So let's just go into this. Let's just do it, right? So obviously the biggest stories of the week: Daquan Wright and Xavier Harris. They were at Ole Miss last year with Lane Kiffin. They went to the pros. They were, they were at camps this year. At least Daquan Wright was. I might be wrong about. Yes, they are. Sorry, they both were. They were both with after spending time at NFL training camps. Sorry, mine's in a blunder about all this. And now they want to come back to college. Let me get this out of the way real quick first. I don't blame Wright or Harris at all. This is an opportunity that is being presented to them to come back to college to make more money than they would make in the NFL this year, have another year to improve your draft stock, and you just know you get to play football this year rather than spending a year on the Browns practice squad or the Saints practice squad, right? So I don't blame those two guys at all for pursuing this. I also don't blame Lane Kiffin, because as long as this is something that's not going to be stopped, which it might only be that way for like another 48 hours, right? As long as it's something that he can do, and they're players that he can acquire through lawsuits that they file, I don't blame Lane from doing it at all, because his job is to put forth the best possible team for LSU this year to go win a championship. That's his job. So I'm never going to blame him. I'll never blame any coach for doing things that are technically, this is against the rules, but it's being held up in courts. Things that are being allowed to happen. If you do them, I'm not going to blame you for it, right? But the other SEC ADs and presidents, they're getting after it. They're very upset. All this was anonymous. This is all coming from an On3 article that came out this afternoon. One president said, quote, "It's a mockery if we allow something like this to happen." Another one said, "Nobody wants this." Then he was asked about, will LSU stand down with all the pressure? He said, "We shall see, but if we can't enforce our own rules, it only spirals downward from there." Another AD said, "Something has to be done. This is the worst that I've seen it." And really the biggest line from this that I took away from it, and maybe really want to elaborate on this a little bit, is that one AD told On3 that if LSU puts either player on the field, he thinks that they should be disqualified from the SEC season and or pay $1 million fine. First off, the $1 million fine, that means nothing in this day and age. So that would kind of just be a formality. That really interesting part of being disqualified from the SEC this year, that's the one that I kind of had the most questions about, because the SEC has that bullet in the chamber. Right, the Big Ten this morning kind of started all of this off by starting to pass those rules. They also have that bullet in the chamber. As the conferences, if a school is going against the rules, and in the SEC's case, right, for LSU, if they're going against what the other 15 schools are doing, you have that bullet of, look, you need us way more than we need you. Right? LSU, massive brand. Huge brand. One of the biggest brands in college football. Undeniably, they need the SEC more than the league needs them. So does Greg Sankey, have the, excuse my language here, balls to use that as a bargaining piece? Now, here, before we get into these meetings, right, sources are telling, On3 other outlets that LSU has no intention of backing down. And that if the SEC tries to penalize LSU, it could give LSU grounds to then sue the SEC. Right? So a lot of this is just kind of just back and forth. You make the first move, I'll make the second, we'll see what happens. And here's the good news about all this. Let me go to the good news here. Let me actually have a sip of this real quick. It's gin. No, it's not. It's black coffee. Maybe I could use gin right now. But here's the good news about all this, right? For all of the problems that are currently facing college football, some of them aren't necessarily like, okay, this will pass in a few months. This will actually pass in a few months because, in terms of Daquan, Xavier Harris, and these other guys that you're seeing try and come back from the NFL training camps to college football, their basis is we deserve to be grandfathered into the 5-for-5 rule, right? Because they've only used 4 years of eligibility. You have, and they used the fourth year last season. This rule came into place, and now they're kind of sitting there like, man, well, if the 5-for-5 applied to people whose fifth years would have been this year, I'd still be in college. I'd still be back there. So with that being the grounds for these guys' arguments, obviously I'm not defending it as a concept, but it does seem like this is a this year thing. We're always going to have waivers and lawsuits for eligibility to a certain degree, but in terms of NFL players coming back, this is the year this is going to happen. So it's annoying, right? It's really annoying. I'd even use I'd use the D word. I'd say dumb too. But it's not going to happen every single year. Because for as much craziness as we still deal with, we won't be dealing with this craziness much longer. Although I do think I've said that about 100 other things. So you never really know. But I'm really interested to see just what it looks like in Birmingham this week at these meetings. Right? Is the SEC going to actually stand up Tulane to LSU and say, look, we're not going to let this happen? Because to LSU's credit, and this is what a Ryan Downton, who was the plaintiff's attorney in the eligibility case in Louisiana, this is what he told On3, is that everyone is acting in concert or participation with it, right? Like, no rules have actually really been broken yet, right? Except for the intra-conference rule from the SEC. That's being challenged right now. But LSU, in theory, is not breaking any rules right now. And that is kind of important to remember as we go into this, because the SEC doesn't need to necessarily punish them for what they've already did. They can just say, this rule is being passed right now. These guys can't play. But then there doesn't need to be any further punishment. But once we get there, right, does LSU punch back? Do they threaten to sue the SEC? I don't really see a way that LSU can win this if the SEC decides to stand up. Right? If Greg Sankey and everyone at the SEC, the other presidents, the other ADs, if they all form a 15-1 between all the schools in the SEC, if versus LSU, which hopefully it doesn't have to come to that, like a civil war in the SEC, but LSU will lose this if the SEC stands strong. There's nowhere here where LSU is the right side of this, in terms of if the SEC makes the ruling that foreign pros can't come back to play. That disqualification bullet that Sankey can use is just a really interesting one. Does he use it? Do they threaten to use it? We'll see, but these meetings in Birmingham this week are going to be really interesting to monitor. And what it makes me think of even more is how grateful I am that we have actual football in 4 days. Because once the season kicks off, yeah, this stuff will still be going on behind the scenes, but it won't be all that we have. Right? We'll have the games on Thursday to look forward to. We'll have our upset watches on the weekend. College football actually coming back is going to... the problems won't necessarily go away, but it's going to give us a lot to fall back on. Right? And a lot of less annoying, tedious, just painful, miserable things to have to talk about. We're about to get college football back. So these meetings in Birmingham for the next 48 hours, this will be really the last push of news no one cares about, annoying eligibility stuff. Why are we even talking about this? We got about 2 more days of that. Right? And then this stuff will come to an end. We will have college football, and things will feel right once again in the world. So thank you for watching this episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. If you want to keep up with this whole case, right, I'll be tracking it on my Twitter pages, here on YouTube, and on TikTok. I'll be up to date on all of it, so follow me everywhere if you want all the SEC football stuff. Once again, go check out A Peek Inside SEC Football. Me, Allie Peek, TJ Pittenger, every single week. Live on Monday mornings, content every single day. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.